So happy Easter, also happy OSTARA, which is more of the ancient pagan holy day that is connected as well. There's lots of interesting interweavings between some of the Christian celebrations of this weekend and some of our ancient pagan traditions as well. And I love finding these weavings because we're really in the age of human unity, and now with the scope of the information age, thanks to the internet, we can start to really tie a lot of these threads together, which is really wonderful. And Easter usually or always falls on the first full moon after the spring equinox, the first Sunday, and this is also hearkening to that more feminine time system of the ancient pagans who really revered the cycle of the moon as well, which is really wonderful. And of course, there's so many interesting parallels. Of course, this is the weekend where Christians celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, and there's so many beautiful mystical Christian notions on this that I find really empowering that I'd like to share. So we can also think of the resurrection as this deeper natural process that we see in spring, because the pagans regarded this also as the time of nature's renewal, nature's resurrection. After the great goddess of earth goes through kind of the death of winter, the great slumber, the great sleep, the holy darkness, where the land sleeps and we have colder energy coming in. It's a time of rest, regeneration, where we're supposed to really be in that process of dreaming and restoring ourselves. And then in spring, we have the resurrection of the earth's vitality, the spring blossom, the bloom, the planting of crops and seeds. And this was seen as a fertility ritual, a fertility festival, OSTARA, as well. And of course, we have from the spring equinox, we then lead into Beltane, which happens in early May, which according to the ancients was the time where we really celebrate the fertility of the land as spring starts to find its zenith of growth. And there are some really beautiful rituals that like Celtic peoples used to celebrate by burning the great fires of Beltane, these great bonfires all over the hills. And on Beltane night, people would go and make love in the land to give their sexual energy to the earth to help inspire the growth of the land, which I find really beautiful and a valuable kind of reclamation, because one of the great meta wounds that we're trying to heal in this current age is that ancient wound around our sexuality that religions have somewhat got into a bit of distortion around. And on that subject, I mean, the resurrection is such a powerful image when it comes to Jesus dying on the cross, going through all this suffering and having this kind of undeterred faith in himself. And you could also look at the resurrection as sort of an example of Jesus having this profound control of his soul body and appearing as more of a soul, as a vision, maybe his astral self. And of course, he appears to Mary Magdalene first, which is also hearkening to this idea in a lot of mystical Christianity that Magdalene was the most important of the disciples, and perhaps she was even Jesus's wife. I know that's quite a controversial topic, but it's something that I love to explore in this time that we live in, and I think it is very important to explore these subjects as well. Something that I've personally found studying more of the mystical threads of Christianity, even Gnostic Christianity, and of course the ancient pagan wisdoms that I've been so, interested and intrigued by, is that in more of the ancient wisdom traditions of the mystery schools, it wasn't just about, this path of suffering, which gets highlighted in Christianity. And there is something noble in highlighting, Jesus's ability to endure suffering and to still find his faith. I mean, in some ways, it's a deep spiritual example, of the resilience that we all have. And even in the face of suffering, to not lose our faith, in ourselves, in the divine, and to keep bringing our light, our radiance, our Christ consciousness forward, the most noble expression of our humanity. And especially not falling into hatred or anger, as Jesus so nobly says on the cross, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. I mean, that kind of heroic, fierce compassion is very profound and very needed in our world. And this is why figures like Jesus are so inspiring as many spiritual adepts, because they've done the work to really be in contact with that eternal self, to sort of loosen the grip of the ego, which is very invested in our own personal identity, and thus falls into fear, fear of death. Oh my God, my identity is going to die one day. I'm going to enter into nothingness. But the spiritual mystics knew that you have to die before you die. And in some ways, that's also a theme of the resurrection for each and every one of us, because as we go throughout life, the psychological process is this perpetual transformation where we're trying to bring more of our authentic self forward, more of that soul self forward, more of that self that knows it's eternal, that it is transmigrating from life to life, and it's here to learn, and it's here to give, and here to serve the greater good. And in that, we go through our own resurrection process anytime we have like some kind of ego transformation where we have to come face to face with maybe a mask that we're wearing, a limiting belief, a pattern. And of course, to transform it, we often have to go through a dark night of the soul. We have to question ourselves. We have to dismantle maybe a false construct of ourselves. And that can be very harrowing as well. And then, and that's kind of like Jesus in the tomb, going through that darkness of the void self. And then from that, we then come back reborn, resurrected, a new version of ourself. And this is one of the processes of life. And for those who are on the spiritual path, who are really devoted to transformation, this is something that you probably know very deeply, the harrowing drama of extracting more of your authentic self from some of the illusory limitations and false beliefs that we've been conditioned to think of ourselves, that the ego can be very identified with. And another thing that I ponder on this day is one thing that I've learned from studying some of these ancient wisdom traditions is that they valued also the path of pleasure, of sacred pleasure. And this is something that with the institutionalization of religion, it's kind of got pushed off to the side. Sexuality, for example, is a very treacherous topic for a lot of the major religions. It's something that we've sought to control. We have priests on the path of celibacy. But of course, when you look at the Vatican and all the crimes that have been committed, whether it's sexual abuse of children, all kinds of things, you see that there is a really unhealthy psychological dynamic here in suppressing our sexuality. And a lot of religions suppress it because they don't understand it, and they're afraid of it. They don't know what to do with it. This is why women and the feminine have carried this kind of shadow that's been projected on them, that women are somehow licentious. And, there's many documentations of like religious teachings, demeaning women as something dangerous because they tempt us into the sin of lust. But when you look at the ancient pagan worlds, sexuality and pleasure was actually seen as sacred. And sexuality was seen as something that could be a form of prayer. We find this in some of the Indian Vedic, tantric texts, this teaching of the Mithuna, which is the rite of sacred sexuality, where a man and a woman come together in union, not just for carnal pleasure, not for that superficial genital intercourse, but they realize that the experience of sexuality actually turns on, it arouses, it opens up, it vitalizes so many energy centers. It actually creates a mystical form of consciousness when we go deep enough in it, when we learn techniques of really being present to each other, learning how to enthuse and amplify the energies and then share them energetically. There's so many techniques of sacred sexuality and Tantra that really revise the sexual act as this sacred sexual experience that can be profoundly healing. And for the ancient pagans, this path of using the sacred pleasure of sexuality was a means to connect to God, to the divine. There's teachings that I've shared around the Nymphian, which is such a beautiful concept. It's when a man and woman make love and they are in this coitus for a long time, exchanging these energies. What ends up happening is their auric fields start to merge and they create this beautiful force field around them called the Nymphian, which the Gnostics said makes them disappear from view from all negative intrusion, the demons or the archons, whatever you want to call them. And this gives them a safe sanctuary to then do spiritual work while they're making love, to share insights, to breathe the energy up, to be in the euphoria, the ecstasy of divine revelation when our energies are enthused in that way. And this is why in my book, Love's Revolution, the final story in that book is a sacred erotic story between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And it's a teaching story. It's not a mockery by any means. It's actually an attempt to teach that, hey, maybe there was an alternative path that has been hidden from us, where Jesus and Mary Magdalene maybe had this beautiful sacred partnership, and even more so that they were, modeling techniques of sacred sexuality to show men and women and any proclivity of sexual partners how to use these energies to heal. Because for the last couple of millennia, we've seen the opposite, how these energies have been weaponized to actually diminish, to distort our humanity. And you need no more evidence than the Epstein files to see what some of the so-called ruling elite classes of our world have been doing with sexuality, using as a kind of parasitic form to take, manipulate, exploit energy. But the truth of the matter is that there are traditions that have been highly suppressed in our ancient world that are now coming back into flowering, that show another way where sacred sexuality can be this beautiful practice and experience to actually get us closer to the divine, so that we can experience direct knowledge ourselves. That's very profound to think about. I had a revelation actually last Sunday after my yoga practice, where I just really saw, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if sacred sexuality was considered an essential teaching in our education systems all over the world, and people were taught how to use their sexual energy, this energy of Eros that has been such a threat, such a torture for so many because we haven't been taught the proper use of it. What if we were taught how to do the Mithuna, to do this sacred sexual rite? What would change in the world? I think it would be very, very profound. I mean, in the ancient world, it was so highly revered, sexuality that is, that even in cultures like in ancient Sumeria, they had the Hieros Gamos, which was the ultimate test for the would-be king. The king-elect would have to go to the temple and he would have to make love to the high priestess. And if he was unable to bring her to the heights of ecstasy, which was a measure of the unity of his masculinity and his femininity, to test whether he was sensitive and loving enough to rule over the people through how he would tenderly make love and strongly make love as well to the high priestess, she was the final call of judgment if he was worthy or not. So many interesting layers there, using sexuality as a way to evaluate leadership, but also, giving that final call to the woman, this woman of high skill and exalted power, the high priestess. Very profound things that I really think would be amazing to be brought back into the world. Now, of course, a lot of this may trigger you, and especially if you are, very religious. And I just want to also add to that, that we have such deep generational trauma around these things. If you just look back in the last 2,000 years, the Dark Ages, how much we've actually punished heretics. And to be a heretic actually means just someone who chooses again, who goes on their own path. But to be such a heretic in these empires, these colonial kind of religions that became very obsessed with having a kind of supreme power, it led to the torture and the murder of thousands, if not millions, actually, of heretics all over the world. We see this as well with the genocide of the Cathars in the 10th, 11th century in France, in the south of France. People who were Christian but believed in a different path of Christianity and rejected the church, and a crusade was leveled against them. And some say in the next 100 years, 1 million of those Cathars were massacred, women, children, and men. So sometimes we have this knee-jerk reaction, like when we think of something like an erotic version of Jesus, it's like, oh my gosh, I have this like trigger. But I'd like to invite that maybe that is because we've been taught these ideas are so dangerous, that they're unsafe, that great harm will come to us if we actually become open and dialogue about them, discuss them. Because this is how generational trauma works. It's so buried, it's so deep. And if you just look at history and you look at the story of humanity in the last millennia, you can see that there have been some really brutal things that have happened to people that dared question things, that dared be heretics and choose another path. So I just wonder, it's an invitation to wonder if sometimes, if those triggers coming forth are sometimes part of that generational trauma. It's an interesting thing maybe to consider. So I just want to put some of those ideas out there and wish everyone happy Easter, happy OSTARA. I hope you find some of the things in this talk in exciting and inspiring even. For me, it's very interesting to just look at all these other mystical threads that are becoming more aware to us, to look at wisdom, to look at these beautiful figures like Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And it's time to really be more open and explore. It's not going to be for everyone, but for those of us who are open to exploring, there's so much beautiful wisdom and information out there. And we always have to have discernment, of course, too. There's, distorted and false information everywhere. But some of the threads that I've been studying for years and years and years have brought so much beauty and inspiration into my life. And I know when I share them with others, there's such a beautiful sacred solidarity there as well. So happy Easter, happy spring. May the blossom of this season come into your life. May you find beautiful inspiration as the spring comes to give a springiness to all of our dreams and visions. This is really, according to the pagans, the new year time. And may it be that our dreams, are given that inspiration to come true. And blessing you all on this holy day of, all days are holy, aren't they? Being on this holy earth, this sacred earth, and this divine life. It's so wonderful to be here with you all. So sending you all so much love. Awen, awen, awen.